Hi, everybody. My name is Christina Balentine. I'm a PhD candidate in the Ecology, Evolution, Behavior program at the University of Texas at Austin. And I want to welcome you guys to our first Science Under the Virtual Stars lecture. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about my dissertation research on human adaptation. And we're going to be bringing in some ideas of how humans can be, and are superhuman. So welcome to Superhumankind, how humans have adapted to thrive all over the world. So I'm an anthropological geneticist. This means that I study DNA to answer questions about humankind, specifically about how humans adapt to wild environments all around the world. Before we get started on that, I want to talk to you all about what is DNA. So we're going to make some observations to figure out what DNA is. I want everyone to activate your superhuman magnifying vision and look at the back of your hand. Now, when I say activate your superhuman magnifying vision, I mean we're going to use our imagination. So I want everyone to look at the back of their hand and pretend that you can see deep, deep, deep down into your cells. So while you guys are using your superhuman magnifying vision, I'm going to use a microscope to show you what we would see if we could see the cells in our skin on the back of our hand. Because our hands, our bodies are made of billions and billions of cells. And some of them, most of them, look a little bit like this. Now, do you think they're actually blue? No. We use a blue dye called methyl blue to make the cells be seen easier. If this picture wasn't, or if the cells in this picture weren't dyed blue, we really wouldn't be able to see anything at all. So you can see each individual blob is a cell. And this isn't necessarily, this is a picture of human cheek cells from like the inside of your cheek, still skin cells, but obviously not from the back of your hand. Do you guys see the little blue, dark blue dots inside each of those cells? That is the cell nucleus. And inside the cell nucleus is a tightly, tightly, tightly coiled stretch of your DNA. So if we were to stretch out our DNA and look at it under a super high powerful magnifying glass, it would look a little bit like this. It's two strands wound around each other into what we call a helix. If we, our DNA contains instructions and directions on how to make us. It makes my hair brown. It makes my eye color, it determines that my eye color is brown. And everyone has different DNA instructions, which makes us all look a little bit different from each other. But if you compared us to any other animals on the planet, we pretty much look exactly the same, right? And if you look at all of everybody's DNA on the face of the planet, it is all 99.9% identical all across the world. So there are some differences. There are differences in that 0.1%, and they are important. They can help people live in different places all over the world in some pretty extreme environments. And that's what I'm going to be talking to you guys about today. So we're going to be talking about how people adapt. Oh, and real quickly, this is what those bases of DNA look like. So each of these connecting lines in between the DNA consist of two bases, what we call bases, which are molecules, tiny, tiny little chemical molecules. And the order of these cytosine, these C's, are paired up with G's, and A's are paired up with T's. However, the order of these are, for example, if we were to look at ACTG, that helps us essentially read the DNA, and that's how I do my research. So, like I was saying, we are going to be talking about adaptation. But what is adaptation? So you might have gone to like, maybe gone and visited the Rocky Mountains of Colorado, and there's not a lot of air up there. And at first when you go and visit, it seems like it's hard to breathe. And your mom or dad or your family might have said, oh, you can't breathe right now, but you'll adapt eventually. So this is a colloquial use of the word adaptation. It is something that happens to you when you go to like high altitudes and you can't breathe very easily at first, but if you stay up there for a week or two, it's much easier to breathe. When that adjustment happens, we say we've adapted to the region. But I am here to tell you that is not the actual scientific definition of adaptation. What is actually happening to you when you makes it easier for you to breathe at higher elevations is what we call acclimation. Adaptation has a specific set of rules, and it happens over many, many, many generations to make a group of living things more suited for their environment. So these requirements for what we as scientists call adaptation is a trait that is, an adaptation is a trait, and this trait is inherited. It makes an individual, or it makes a group of individuals more fit in their environment, and that just means that they are able to survive and reproduce and thrive in their environment more easily. And finally, this is driven by natural selection. So an example of an adaptation in humans is a thumb. Our thumbs are an example of an adaptation. If you did some of the activities that we posted, then you'll know how important thumbs are. So our thumbs are an inherited trait, most likely, unless something has, there's been a mistake in when DNA is being passed on to offspring. Most of the time, our offspring are also going to have thumbs. They make us more fit. It's easier to eat and do things and talk and grab and just survive in the world with thumbs. When I was a kid, there was a no thumbs eating challenge where you had to tape your thumb to your palm and try to do things kind of similar to the activity we posted. And it's clearly still a thing when there's YouTube videos being posted, and it's very hard to do things without a thumb. So it makes us more fit to our environment. And it's driven by natural selection. This is a picture from a publication on an ancient, long dead hominin species. So one of our distant cousins. And this cousin has thumbs. So it's driven by natural selection. Our distant ancestors, pre-humans, had thumbs. And all humans have thumbs. So these are an example of an adaptation. And adaptations take thousands, hundreds, maybe even thousands of generations to arise and be in a population. Essentially, one little change in our DNA sequence might make us more fit for the environment. And these little changes are what I'm going to be talking about today. So we're going to journey all around the world, learning about some different human adaptations to really extreme environments. And our first stop, we're going to travel from Texas to the high altitude Andes in Peru. So the highest town in the world, I'm going to move myself so you all can see how high it is. This is the highest town in the world. It's La Rinconada, Peru, at 5,130 meters above sea level, or 16,830 feet. So we measure elevation and high altitude by the distance above sea level. So if we want to say the ocean or sea level is 0 meters, La Rinconada is over 3 miles higher than the ocean. So for comparison, the elevation of Austin is 149 meters or 489 feet. And I want us to do a simulation. We're going to pretend that we're in La Rinconada here in Austin. I mean, I'm personally not here in Austin. I live in Connecticut, which is why I've got the background, but I am a student at Austin, so we're going to base all this off of Austin. So I'm going to pretend that what can we do to get up to an altitude, to an elevation as high as La Rinconada is, but they're in Austin. So I think a way we could simulate this is, you all know the Frost Bank Tower in downtown Austin, right? Kind of looks like a big owl. So this building is 157 meters tall. And I think if we were to, obviously we can't do this in real life, but if we were able to stack a bunch of these on top of each other and then take an elevator all the way up to the top, we might be able to reach this height, this elevation of La Rinconada, Peru. So how many do you think we would need? How many buildings do you think we would need to stack on top of each other in order to reach 3 miles above sea level? And remember, we're already 489 feet above sea level. I'll let you think about that for a second. So in order to get as high above sea level as La Rinconada, Peru, we would have to stack 32 frost buildings on top of each other. 32! Kind of like this. If you count, there are 32 buildings there. Whew. Thank goodness we wouldn't have to take any stairs on this, and we're only pretending, because that would be a lot of stairs. So I want you guys to think, do you think it would be easy or hard to live high up in the Andes Mountains? For me personally, because I live really close to sea level, and I was born and raised by people who really live near sea level, and all of my ancestors lived near sea level, it would be really hard for me to live in La Rinconada and other towns that exist high in the Andes Mountains in South America, or high in the Ethiopian highlands in Africa, and high in the Himalayan mountains in Asia. But these people who live here and whose ancestors have lived here for thousands of years, they have no problems. So when you look at this picture, why do you think it would be difficult for someone like me to live high in the mountains? But it's perfectly fine and wonderful for people who have lived up there and whose ancestors who've lived up there for a long time. So as you think of some different answers, there's one thing we've already talked about. We talked about the air. When you get really high up in the mountains, the air is thinner, which means there's less oxygen. So every time you take a deep breath in, you're getting less oxygen than if you were at sea level. So you end up, your blood has less oxygen, and your blood needs oxygen for your body to work. But people who live in the Andes and in Ethiopia and in the Himalayas, these people have adapted over hundreds of generations because there's been small changes in their DNA instructions that allow them to have slightly larger lungs. So when they inhale, they get more oxygen into their bodies, and their blood is able to carry more oxygen. Blood carries oxygen throughout our bodies, and as these changes have allowed these people, their blood is able to carry oxygen more efficiently through their bodies. So this and all other kinds of adaptation, as I said, require thousands of generations to become common. So people who live in these regions and who have family that lived up here, and they've had great-great-great-great-great-great-grandparents who've lived in this region for hundreds of generations. And these changes occurred in one person, and that slowly spread to their offspring and their offspring's offspring and their offspring, and it made life easier in this region. But it's not just DNA changes that allow people to live high up in the mountains. What are some other changes? Cultural changes. People can invent things to live more comfortably too. Some things that maybe you can think of that would help them stay warm in someplace cold, like high up in the mountains, like blankets, maybe, coats, houses, warm houses, fire. All of these warm inventions help the next group of peoples that we're going to meet. People have been living in the frozen environments all across the Arctic, in Siberia, Alaska, Canada, Greenland, Norway, Sweden, and Finland for tens of thousands of years. In these cold regions, people obviously need warm clothes also to survive, but there have also been adaptations that these people have. So do you think fruits and vegetables will grow easily here, where the sun barely rises half of the year? Nope. Because of this, nowadays people have airplanes that allow some fruits and veggies to come in. But before airplanes were invented, people who lived up here mainly ate fish and animal meat that they hunted. So these people's bodies adapted to being able to eat and digest high-fat animal foods. So they've also been able to adapt to the cold temperatures by having a faster metabolism, which means their body uses up energy faster. And this can help their bodies stay warmer, and therefore they will stay healthier. And although today people don't wear the same woolen parkas or like animal fur parkas as they did in the past, they still have warm clothing and occasionally wear this traditional clothing for certain reasons as they wish. Yeah. So another extreme environment, we're going to go back to the Andes Mountains, and now we're going to start talking a little bit about toxic environments. These environments would make other people feel really, really sick. In northern Chile and Argentina, there are high levels of a toxic chemical in the water. This toxic chemical is called arsenic. If someone who hasn't lived in this region or have family that lived in this region for thousands or hundreds of years drank the water that flows naturally in the region, they would get very, very sick. But people have lived there for over 10,000 years, and this environment so they've become adapted to low levels of toxic arsenic-laden water. I think it's important to mention, however, that recent, as in the past 50 years or so, environmental disasters have also happened in this region, which have released even more higher levels of the toxic arsenic into the water. Mining of the region causes there to be more arsenic in the water, which makes people who, even though they're adapted to the normal low levels of arsenic in the water, it's not very safe anymore to drink the water in this region, even for people who are adapted to it. Another cool adaptation that some of you might have, who here can drink milk. So being able to drink milk after childhood is another adaptation. Milk has a sugar in it called lactose. And normally after babies have been weaned from their mother's breast milk, most humans cannot drink milk after this because an enzyme that breaks up this sugar called lactase, it breaks up the sugar in the body as it's being digested. Usually that enzyme turns off. It doesn't work anymore in adulthood. But in Africa and in the Mideast and in Europe, people domesticated animals that produced milk. They domesticated cows and goats and camels. And at times when other food supplies might be rare, having access to animal milk was a great source of protein and calcium and other nutrients. And so since we domesticated animals around 10,000 years ago, over the past 10,000 years, people's bodies, populations' bodies have adapted, and that lactase enzyme is staying on in adults who have ancestry from these regions, who domesticated animals and relied on animal milk for their dietary nutrients. Otherwise, ironically, or you wouldn't expect it because it seems like here in the United States, it's pretty normal for people to be able to drink milk, but that's because a lot of people in the United States draw their ancestry from these regions. Their ancestors used to live in these regions that originally domesticated dairy animals, so they can drink milk as an adult. However, most people around the world do not have the ability to drink milk as an adult. They have lactose intolerance and would get very sick if they were to drink milk because their body couldn't digest it. And one last adaptation, I'll put myself back over there, one last adaptation to the entire world that I want to talk about is skin color. So if we were to look around our school, if we were all at Science Under the Stars at Breckenridge Field Laboratory together, just look around the room, we would see people of all different skin colors and skin tones. And this is thanks to adaptation, and to a very specific adaptation to the environment all around the world. So if we look at a map of skin color distribution across the world, we see that along the equator, there's darker skin, like most people have darker skin colors. And as we move away from the equator, there's lighter skin colors. And this has to do with the amount of UV radiation that is distributed across the globe. So if we look down at the second picture, the warmer reds and pinks and yellows indicate high levels of UV radiation, whereas the blues, greens, and whites show low levels of UV radiation. So what do these two maps have in common? What do you think might be causing the distribution of skin color across the world? It's UV radiation. So UV radiation can cause skin cancer. If we are to go out into the sun without sunscreen, we could get skin cancer. And the melanin in dark skin has essentially helps block these UV rays from damaging skin cells and causing them to become cancerous. So it's really good when you live in regions that have high levels of UV radiation along the equator and in high altitude regions to have darker colored skin. And conversely, as you move farther away from the equator, it's helpful to have lighter colored skin so that UV radiation can penetrate the skin and help make vitamin D. So it's important to go out and to get a little bit of sun every day, but excessive amounts of sun is damaging for everyone, whether you have light skin, dark skin, medium skin, or any of that. And finally, not all superhuman powers have to do with genetic adaptation, have to do with DNA. These are superpowers that if you wanted to and you wanted to work really hard, you could acquire them yourself. these are people that work hard and push their body's limits to do some amazing things. There are people who can hold their breath for a really long time. The world record is over 20 minutes. I don't know about you, but I can only hold my breath for like 30 seconds. There's also super strength and super reading abilities, if you can believe it. Anne Jones, this woman down here in the center, can read Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows in just 47 minutes. That's a big book. That's a really quick reading. And also this gentleman here in the corner, Kim Peek, can read incredibly fast, and each of his eyes can read one side of the paper at the same time. So his left eye could be reading the left page of the book, and his right eye could be reading the right page of the book at the same time. It's pretty wild. Oops, hit my computer. So I want to talk to you guys, wrapping up, a little bit about my own dissertation research. I mentioned earlier that I study adaptation, and specifically, I use ancient DNA from people who lived thousands of years ago to examine adaptation to the cold environment in Patagonia and Tierra del Fuego in southern South America. So ancient DNA is highly degraded and fragmented, which means our normally long strands of DNA have been degraded by the elements over being buried for hundreds or thousands of years, and it's gotten broken up into pieces. And there's a lot less DNA in cells that have been deceased for a long time than there is in living cells. So we have to be extremely careful when we are trying to extract ancient DNA from remains. And we want to try to minimize the contamination from our own cells, from our own DNA. So anytime we're going to go work with ancient DNA, I have to put on a hairnet, I have to put on 2 pairs of gloves, and this fully cover myself in this outfit called coveralls, wear a face mask, some extra sleeves, and basically the only part of me that is uncovered are my eyes. And you can actually see, this is me down here. It's probably hard to tell. And we also practice unidirectional work. So sometimes we have to go into the lab. We have 2 separate labs. We have one lab that we do ancient DNA work in, and another lab that we do contemporary DNA work in. And we always, if we are going to go into the ancient DNA lab, we always have to go into that first. So we practice this one-way traffic going from the ancient DNA lab into the contemporary DNA lab. And this is because there is so much contemporary DNA floating around in our contemporary lab. We do a process in this lab called PCR, polymerase chain reaction, and that process takes pieces of DNA and duplicates and triplicates and quadruplicates, makes millions and millions of copies of these small pieces of DNA. And these DNA is so small that it can get into the air. So we just walk into the contemporary lab and our clothes will be covered in contemporary DNA. And if we were to go back into the ancient lab, we would bring that contemporary DNA with us, and we wouldn't be able to see the small fragmented pieces of the ancient DNA because it would just be overpowered by the contemporary DNA. There would be too much contemporary DNA. We wouldn't be able to separate it from the ancient DNA. So we have to be very careful. So like I said, I look at adaptation, biocultural adaptation to cold climate and diet in Patagonia and Tierra del Fuego in Chile. And I'm interested in seeing how people have adapted to that cold environment and how that compares to what we already know about how people adapted to the cold environment of the Arctic. So I will be doing research using DNA from ancient and contemporary peoples who live and lived in this region for over 6,000 years. And I don't have any results yet. I'm still doing preliminary DNA analyses, but I'm hoping to see parallels in genetic adaptation between the cold Arctic environments and the cold environments of Patagonia and Tierra del Fuego in southern South America. So I just want to make sure everyone gets a chance to see additional photo credits for all the lovely pictures I was able to use in this presentation. And if you want to learn more about human adaptation, here are some great resources that I highly recommend. And remember that we will be doing a live Q&A with me on October 8th at 7 p.m. Central Daylight Time. And if you have any questions from just watching this video now, please fill out the Google form that we link to. And those will hopefully, we'll try to get those answered during the live Q&A, or just save your questions for the 8th. And I look forward to chatting with you all. Have a great one, and bye.